Now it's time to join a celebratory edition of Gardener's Question Time, because today the programme has reached its 40th anniversary. Clay Jones introduces the proceedings from the Old Palace at Hatfield.
Hello and welcome to a very special 1727th edition of Gardener's Question Time from Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, home of the Marquis and Marchioness of Salisbury. It is famed also for its annual Festival of Gardening, which this year is on the 20th and the 21st of June. Now, 40 years ago this week, the very first programme was broadcast from the Broad Oak Hotel in Ashton-under-Lyne. And on the panel of experts on that memorable day were Bill Sauberts and the late Fred Lowe. Sometime later, they were joined by the late Professor Alan Gemmell. And for over 30 years, this erudite trio was a regular panel that shared the washing up with you at 2 p.m. after Sunday lunch and provided a valid excuse for a tea break every Wednesday morning at 10. Freddie Griswood, Franklin Engelman, and Michael Barrett once chaired the program, and they were followed by the late and much-loved Ken Ford, who acted, as you know, as both chairman and producer for many years. Times change, so do people, but gardening goes on forever. And 40 years on, we, the present team, proudly follow our predecessors. Our audience today is also very special. We have over 300 members drawn from about 70 gardening societies and clubs here in the South. And we also have a number of worried, well-known personalities in the public eye. They are famed for their art and they're worried by gardening problems that our team are about to tackle. Ladies and gentlemen, your Gardener's Question Time team, Geoffrey Smith of Harrogate, Daphne Ledward of Spalding, Dr. Stefan Buczacki of Stratford-upon-Avon, and Fred Downham of Lancaster. Thank you very much. Could we have the first question, please?
Penelope Keith. 2 years ago, I was given a stephanotis in a little pot that was rather tortured into a circle. I spent 2 hours untorturing it and let it run riot in my conservatory. And last year it bloomed beautifully. I had about 50 or 60 blooms. Marvellous. In the autumn, I suddenly looked and there was the dread mealybug. I've gone around with a little painting brush, dipped in methylated spirits quite often, and tried to paint them away. The leaves are now falling away from the base. I wonder what I'm going to do about it.
Yes, so are we. Right, the leaves are dropping off, Stefan, and it's had the methylated spirits treatment, so what happens next?
I always take it a little bit personally when stephanotis is suffering in the way that yours has suffered, Penelope. I feel a great kinship with this plant. Now, you have gone around with the methylated spirits, and when that has failed, all I can suggest in a situation like that is that you do 2 things. I think you should take some cuttings from it, of the bits that don't have this wretched creature on them, this mealybug. And for the rest of it, I would suggest, and I don't like doing this, but we have to suggest it sometimes, I think you've got to use a chemical. And I think you've got to use a systemic insecticide. You have to use something that will get up inside the plant and kill the things from underneath. So I would suggest an insecticide like dimethoate, drench the compost of the pot that it's growing in. It'll suck that up, and in time, the mealybugs will suck up the insecticide as well. But I would take those cuttings as a wise precaution. Yes, I think so.
How large a pot should it be in? It's now in a 9-inch and it's about 35 foot long. Is that too small?
A 9-inch pot and it's 30... Well, I think if you put it in a very much bigger pot than that, it's more likely to be 300 feet long in due course. I would keep it a little constrained, but give it the insecticide.
Right.
And I think all will be well.
Take heart.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who's next, please?
Julian Pettifer. I've got a riverside garden, and I've been trying to establish some damp-loving trees and plants there. About 10 years ago, I planted 3 swamp cypress, Taxodium disticum and Disticum pendens, and the third one, whose name I can't remember, but I wrote it down, Ascendens nutans. They're well established in the margin beside the river, in the muddy margin of the river, but they have made practically no growth at all. Now, I've seen how big they will grow, both in their native home and also at Kew, and I want to know why mine aren't growing and what can I do? Should I move them? And I just wonder whether the temperature's too low for them or what it is.
Geoffrey, it's the Taxodium, the swamp cypress.
It's a fallacy to think that the bald cypress or the swamp cypress needs to have its feet in water. I grew them for many years in my last garden. We had 3 planted on the stream side, and I moved one of them out, and it doubled in size in 10 years, where it was planted in well-draining soil so its feet could go down and find water. There is a feeling that because it grows in swampy conditions in its natural habitat, that it won't survive away from those conditions anywhere else. And for people who don't know what a swamp cypress is, it's a very feathery foliage plant. It's a deciduous plant. It turns the most gorgeous color in the autumn. And the suggestion I would make is that if you moved it so it was growing in fairly dry soil, but where its roots could go down and find water, then I think you would have no problem.
So you're really telling me that it's not going to make any growth where it is, are you?
No, shift it out.
Well, yes. Fred, would you move it? If you would move it, when would you move it?
I'd move it right away, Julian. Straight away. In fact, you can go home now if you want and start doing it.
No, hang on a minute. We haven't finished yet.
How big are they present, by the way?
Oh, I should think they're about no more than about 4 feet, I should think.
Your hand is up 6 feet.
Sorry. Yes, but my feet are in the water. Between 4 and 6 feet.
You reckon you can manage these all on your own, do you, to move them?
Oh, I can move them.
Good,
yes,
off you go then. Get your spade out and get yourself on and try.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another problem? Yes, we have.
Germaine Greer. Here at Hatfield House there's a wonderful scented garden, and in it there are 3 plants that bloom in the winter and cast their scent very effectively even on the darkest day. A buddleia, auriculata I think it is, a clematis serosa balearica, and a honeysuckle, Lonicera popuzii, winter beauty. Ever since I first saw them in bloom, I've been trying to get those plants for my garden. I can hardly find a nurseryman who offers them, and when I have, and I've written away for them, I've got that letter back that says, we're keeping your money, but we haven't got the plant. Would you like something else that costs 5 times as much and doesn't resemble it at all? Finally, I found a buddleia auriculata, and I planted it on a south-facing wall, and I lost it in the January frosts. What advice can anyone on the panel give me about keeping them alive and well once I've found them?
Right. Daphne, we haven't heard from you yet.
The problem is that a lot of the ones that you mention are not entirely hardy, and even though you're talking about a south wall, which, as you know, generally is the most warm and the most sheltered wall in a garden, we have had 2 at least phenomenal winters. And I'm finding that very many of the things that normally I would recommend on a south-facing wall are just not standing up to the extremely cold winter conditions. One that I came across last year, which comes more or less into your category because it isn't terribly hardy, but with protection I've got it through this winter, and that's Baronia. And Brown Meg, which is one that is now being offered by certain garden centres in Britain, I have found that with the protection of a south wall will actually come through the sort of winter that we've had. And it has, it has got its lovely little brown bell-like flowers on it, and with protection it is actually flowering up March, April, which to me is still winter in my part of the country.
Thank you, Daphne. Stefan, I suppose one of the main troubles is that very often these, even south walls, can be frost pockets if they're low down, can't they?
Yes, and there is a problem also if they warm up considerably early in the year.
Can I just ask one additional question, though? I've got a Clematis armandii, which is growing on a north wall, which never gets any sun, which came through the winter without missing a beat, is covered with huge buds. I've got a terrible feeling I should have put my buddleia auriculata on a north wall and not on a south wall at all.
That is often true, because people think that north spells cold, but in fact what does plants most damage is very often not the depth of the winter cold, but whether they get warmed up, thawed out very quickly early in the year. So an east-facing wall that gets sunny on an early morning in February will do plants much more damage than a north wall, where they stay frozen and ultimately thaw out very slowly. That's very true.
Don't give up, keep trying.
Thank you.
Yes, madam.
Molly Weir. I'd like to ask the team about my eucalyptus tree. I had some advice which I followed religiously the first year. I cut it down to 6 feet, trimmed all the side growths back, and was left with a walking stick. But sure enough, when it grew, the leaves were round and young and silvery. Now last year, my Scottish spirit trembled at cutting back all that new growth. So I only cut back the smaller little sprays. I left a lot of side branches and had a delicately branching tree all winter. Now comes the third year for pruning, and I notice the leaves are a darker green, and worse, they've grown pointed. Is it too late to recover its youth? Have I done for it? Now, I planted this tree in memory of a dear gardening friend of mine because I like to do this rather than buy a wreath of flowers. Because every time I look at it, I think of this super gardener, and I want to keep it as young and perfect and silvery as he would like. So what should I do?
What a lovely thought, Molly, isn't it? So you wanted to keep this thing as young as yourself. Mm-hmm. Right, Fred, what can Molly do now?
Be cruel to be kind, definitely. It loves pruning. You go out with your pruners somewhere around about June, Molly.
June?
Yeah, and you let into that tree and lay it low. Go down as far as you like, down those new shoots. And it will branch out again, and it'll come back. It doesn't matter how far you cut it back, it will grow. And all the new growth...
Will I take it right back to the trunk?
No, not right back to the trunk, but cut back all the new growth, as far back as you like into that year's growth, last year's growth. And the resultant growth of that will be those nice little round leaves with silver undersides that you require. The older growth, always on eucalyptus, will go dark grey and pointed, and not half as nice as that young growth. But you use your secateurs in June, and you'll find it'll repay you.
You're looking worried, Molly.
I know, because I don't know the difference between the old growth and the new growth.
Well, one looks older than the other.
Yeah. It's a bit like me and you, Molly. You're the young one, and I'm the old one.
Does that help, Molly?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
John Humphreys, as a convert from television to radio, I wonder whether the team members might ever be converted from chemically based gardening to totally organic gardening. Might we have in the next 40 years a Gardener's Question Time in which no recommendation to use chemical is ever made?
Are you suggesting that television is inorganic and that we tend to be a mucky lot on radio? I don't know. Geoffrey, what's your answer?
Well, I've always been a muck and magic man, John, because I was trained in private gardening, and we had to produce the top quality fruit and vegetables. And we didn't use any poison sprays. We used tar oil wash, certainly. And it wasn't until I went to college that I realized to grow quality fruit, according to the people who ran the college, you had to spray apples, for example, 4 times with lime sulfur, including an insecticide in the lime sulfur spray. So if you ask me, is it possible to produce top quality fruit and vegetables and flowers without sprays, without using the what I call the really poisonous, persistent chemicals, which I deplore entirely, the answer would be yes, because I've done it. And I totally agree, the things we've done to our environment don't bear thinking about it. So I'm with you, mate. If you want to start a club for organic gardening, then I am absolutely with you. Because if I'm going to eat it, I want to know what's gone on, and good plain farm manure or compost, fine.
Perhaps you could start a manure magazine on Today every morning.
I'm no good at making compost, that's the trouble.
Oh, Stefan can help you there.
Oh, yes, I'll take you aside later, John, and we'll have a little compost discussion. I think that, to go back to what you were saying, though, I think you would probably admit that if you listen to the advice that we give week by week, it is relatively infrequently that you would find us recommending some or any of the more noxious chemicals. I don't think you will ever hear us recommending mercury compounds. You'll very rarely hear us recommending chemicals like HCH. I can't remember the last time I heard sodium chlorate mentioned on this program. You would tend to find, I think, that we preface our recommendations with a remark like one of the safer insecticides or one of the safer chemicals. I'm just as much in favour of this as you are, but I would sincerely hope that it is very, very rarely, if ever, that the persistent artificial chemicals are ever mentioned by us.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Richard Briers. I've got this box hedge about 3 feet high. I'm very, very fond of it, and it smells very nice in the evening. But the last 3 years, regularly, it's been attacked by about 50 billion whitefly. And I've tried the spraying once a week for 3 consecutive weeks. But it's worrying because I always feel the spray may get me before it gets the whitefly. This is also very nasty sitting in the garden, which is a small garden, on a windy day, because you get the kind of snowstorm effect as this larvae or some stuff comes up. And I've also got a black mongrel dog who's slightly highly strung, who actually has a habit he runs through it and comes out snow white and frightens the cat. It's an awful problem, and I don't like it. Is there any way I can get rid of this awful stuff without the spraying?
Without the spray?
Yeah.
Right. Stefan, Richard has got a hedge where Whitefly are enjoying the good life. Is there a natural way of shifting them on?
Well, what is natural and what is unnatural? There are only two ways that I can think of that you can control whitefly. One is with a chemical that you're not keen to do. The other is by what we call biological control, where you set a beast to catch another beast. But biological control, you're looking excited at the prospect. But the trouble with biological control is that you get a little wasp-like creature, and you set that to attack the whiteflies, and it clears up the whiteflies. But the trouble is, in the great outdoors, you see, the little wasp-like creature would fly away and find somebody else's garden to do its stuff in. And it really only works if you can lock them all up together in a greenhouse. Now, in the absence of suggesting you grow a greenhouse over your hedge and put the things together in it, I think it's got to come back to sound perhaps a little more reliable, but not too obnoxious. I realise you don't want obnoxious chemicals. Derris.
Yes.
Good old-fashioned Derris, but done regularly as you suggest.
That's right.
I think that's the answer, though. Derris or a greenhouse over your hedge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mary Whitehouse. I'm a great lover of peonies, and I have great clumps, what we used to call miners' roses, and the other more modern varieties, and they do marvellously. So I thought to myself, I'd buy a tree peony. So I did. And I put it in about 6 or 7 years ago. I doubt if it's grown more than a few inches. It has one flower only each year. What's the matter with my tree peony?
Your herbaceous peonies are doing fine.
Oh, marvellous.
Marvellous. The tree peony is doing nothing at all.
Not really.
Right. Fred?
Is it in the open garden? Is it out
Yes.
in a bed somewhere? Or?
Well, it's in a bed.
And what do you actually plant in that bed along with your peony?
Oh, things like saxifrage, low-growing, and perhaps bedding plants like, the ordinary annual bedding plants and so on.
So every year you're probably going into that bed and using a fork and digging over the ground to plant your bedding plants.
I've already been. I went yesterday.
What a pity it wasn't...
It's a week.
Yeah, it wasn't a week ago when we met you, because one thing you're doing wrong is going in there with a fork and digging over the ground, because they do not like their roots disturbed. That will check the growth. So what I suggest you do is actually to plant other things in there which are perennial, and leave them in there and let it grow just naturally in amongst other plants. But one other thing that must happen is that they must not be in the sun first thing in the morning. Because what will happen is that the frost will actually freeze the buds, and if they thaw out quickly, that's the end of the buds on your tree peony.
Well, it's out where the sun shines all day long.
Yeah, well, you have to put an umbrella over it, keep the sun off it in the morning.
An umbrella?
Yeah, umbrella.
Is it a good plant to have in your garden?
Oh, yeah.
The
Beautiful.
tree peony?
Beautiful.
Oh, I know it is when it comes, but if it doesn't come, what's the point of having it in your garden?
None at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Penelope Mortimer. I have a sort of funny system whereby I write during the winter. This is the idea anyway. And garden 9 months of the year actually, and write for 3 months, right? So at the moment I've been away, and I'm going back tomorrow to my garden, which has not been touched in any way since about November. Now I'm in a panic as to know what I do first. What priority? I haven't pruned the roses, I haven't pruned the clematis, I haven't fed anything. I'm going back to a sort of wilderness, really. What should I do first?
Does look a mess, doesn't it?
I haven't even seen it. I've got to see it tomorrow to begin with, and I get over the shock of that.
Right. Where would you start, Geoffrey?
I don't think you'll have any problems, because the best gardener of all between November and about the end of February is winter. It will have taken care of most of the things that you think you should have done. And with a garden like that, the first thing I do, because it tidies everything up and it squashes all the molehills, is to cut the lawn. That makes it look as though you've lived in the house anyway. And probably the next thing I would do is prune the roses.
Yeah.
Because it gets you such a bad reputation if your roses look like a telegraph pole with a crow's nest on top. And the only way you can stop them looking like that is to prune them.
Yeah.
And the pruning of hybrid tea roses, the more you prune according to variety, really, don't go and butcher them, because the harder you prune both hybrid teas and floribundas, the more they'll grow. So you deal with them circumspectly and prune them lightly and then feed them. Because there's one thing, mind, if you haven't fed them for a year or two, just warn them you're going to do it. Because
How do I warn them?
just tell them I'm going to feed you, otherwise you'll frighten them to death if you don't. But those are the two things I would do. I would cut the lawn first. That will tardy. The neighbours will say she's back. We'd better start behaving ourselves and stop pilfering her vegetables. And then I would prune the roses and feed them.
And what about the clematis?
Oh, yes, you should have. If it's a jackmanai, one of that group.
Oh, I've got dozens of clematis, and there's another thing I suddenly remembered I wanted to ask you. Some of them have lost their labels, and I can't tell from looking at them what kind of, what group they belong to. Now, how do I prune those?
If they're growing, love, I wouldn't bother very much because, yes, the jackmanais, look for a big fat bud.
Yeah.
If the flower is getting way up on the top, look down for a big fat bud and cut back to that. I cut jackmanai back to within 1 or 2 buds of the old wood.
Wouldn't that be a bit too far? Beginning of April, Geoffrey?
No.
Really?
As long as you don't leave a calendar lying about and the clematis can't see it, it won't worry in the slightest. It'll grow. It'll start growing from the bud you cut to. Don't touch Montana at all.
No.
I wouldn't touch, of course, alpina, the Atragene alpina, or the clematis macropetala. They'll be almost in flower, and they're gorgeous. Oh, your garden will be fine, lass. Don't worry about it at all.
No.
If I can just give one little word of advice, and that is don't get fussed about the fact that you are behind. Because if you do, what should be a pleasure becomes a chore.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And just one last question, please.
Johnny Morris. In the autumn of 1984, I prepared about an acre of ground for tree planting and to be undersown with wild flowers and grasses. The wild flowers and grasses came up in the spring of 85, and they were a picture. Cornflowers of all colours, wild pansies, spurge, corncockle, poppy, sainfoin, vetches and clover. It was certainly worth the several £100 I paid for the wildflower seeds. But in the spring of 1986, there were no flowers, just a few tuffets of grass here and there. The trees are doing fine, thanks to 2 very wet summers. But where have all the wildflowers gone?
Good question. And you spent a lot of money, Johnny, didn't you?
I'm afraid I did.
Yes. Well, let's ask Daphne.
Oh dear, I don't think there's anything much that one can do about it. The trees are planted at what distance apart?
Oh, they're about 6 yards.
So for a number of years you are then going to have a meadow with trees in it, and as the trees get bigger you are then going to have a more of a condition of open woodland.
The trees are getting quite big. You know, some of them were 6 to 8s when they went in.
Yes, but they don't cast an awful lot of shade, or do they?
Not yet, no.
No, so really we've got the problem as it stands at the moment, which might be another problem in a few years' time, because most of the species that you list are open meadow species.
Yeah.
They're not woodland edge or woodland species, and I think eventually you're going to have to review the situation with a possible view to redoing it again as the area underneath gets darker.
But what I can't understand, Fred, is why they vanish so completely.
Well, the last 2 years are anything to go by, Johnny.
Yeah.
They've been very good years, as you know, being a farmer for growing grass.
Yeah.
Nice and wet, nice and moist.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, towards the end of the season, not very good weather for setting seeds.
Was that what it was?
And I reckon that's what's to do with your seeds from your wildflowers.
Yeah.
They are not viable, they've probably been shed, or they may not even have been shed, and therefore you're not going to get any seedlings. And I think that's what they are. I'm afraid you're going to have to start all over again. But I wouldn't do it immediately. I would wait until your trees grow, and then, as Daphne said, I would switch from open ground plants to woodland plants. You'll be growing things like, wood sorrel, primroses, those sort of things in that sort of an area. You'll not get the others to grow. Your guarantee, I think, is if anyone can guarantee you a good summer after you've sown your next lot of wildflowers, then I think that's your guarantee for the future.
Keep at it, Jerry.
Thank you very much.
And it's time for topical tips once again, starting with you, Stefan.
I find there's nothing more frustrating in the summer if I'm working with the small hoe or the trowel, or I'm planting something, than slicing through a clump of bulbs that I had forgotten was there. So what I'm going to suggest you do is to arm yourself with a small handful of small little split canes, and to go around the garden now before all the spring flowering bulbs have disappeared and mark the positions of the clumps. You can do it discreetly, so that when summer comes, you're not going to slice through them every time you dig into the soil.
Thank you, Stefan. Fred, your tip?
I'm going to be planting onion sets, Clay, but a little bit differently. I put mine now 1 or 2 inches apart, very tight together in the rows. And in that way, I increase my crop by about 3 times. But they're not round, they've all got flat sides. But my wife says that's an advantage because they actually don't roll off the turning board.
Thank you, Fred. Daphne, your tip?
Well, my tip is at the beginning of April, it's far too late now to be thinking about planting bare root roses, and especially the ones you see sweating the little hearts out in polythene bags with great long white shoots on them, which are never going to do any good. But it's a very good time to use containerised roses. Containerised roses are very much better now than they were a few years ago, and they're a very good bet if you've missed your planting season for the others. But just a tip, a lot of them in the containers are planted so that the budding union is sticking out at the top of the container. This is because they won't fit into the container properly otherwise. When you plant them, do the same as you do with your bare root ones, and that is to put it about an inch below soil level and firm them in properly, otherwise they'll never do very well.
Thank you, Daphne. Good tip. And finally, yours, Geoffrey.
Just a thought for a flower that not a lot of people grow, and I can't understand why, and that is the acamines, the hot water plant. And if you pot them up now, and you'll have flower from the end of June right through into October, and they only need one consideration, and that is to ensure that the compost never dries out. Keep them warm and wet, and unlike a baby, they'll do fine for you.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and that's all for today. Next week, we begin the next 40 years of Gardener's Question Time in the more usual venue of the Village Hall. We will be visiting the Oxfordshire village of Blueberry, where we'll be guests of the Village Produce Association. Till then, it's goodbye and good gardening from Geoffrey Smith, Dr. Stefan Buczacki, Daphne Ledward, Fred Downham, our producer Diana Stenson, and from me, Clay Jones. A very good day to you.
Gardener's Question Time was produced in Manchester. An extended version of the programme will be broadcast in the summer during the usual Gardener's Question Time break. But in the meantime, you can catch up again with those celebrated questions and questioners just after 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning.